Is Donald Trump a fascist? Left-wing influencers like Hassan Piker have labeled him exactly that, and there is a general sentiment on the left that seems to resonate with this. To avoid controversies, in my opinion, both the left and the right uses some terms too loosely and honestly adds to destroying public discourse. In this video, I want to call out that simplification, look at the facts, examine Trump's rhetoric and policies, and compare them with the core features of fascism. If you want to understand how Trump's rhetoric is similar to that of fascists, yet how it differs, watch until the end. Can a slogan like "Make America Great Again" hold the key to understanding everything about Donald Trump's political ideology? To explore this, I turn to Umberto Eco's concept of Fascism, a framework of 14 principles that define fascist thought across history. Eco's principles are not a checklist, but a set of patterns, ideological markers that can manifest in different ways. The first principle is the cult of tradition. For fascists, tradition represents an unchanging truth, an idealized past lost that must be restored. Trump's MAGA slogan embodies this perfectly, tapping into nostalgia for a mythic version of America. For the middle class, it recalls a time when one income could support a household, manufacturing jobs were plentiful, and the American dream felt within reach. For Christians, it speaks to a time of traditional family values and religious prominence. Trump's rhetoric on issues like abortion, prayer in schools, the Bible, and the supposed war on Christmas became a rallying cry for evangelicals who felt sidelined by secular, progressive movements. Interestingly, even some immigrant groups bought into this idealized past. For them, the appeal of MAGA lay in the perception of America as a land of opportunity, one where hard work was rewarded with upward mobility, despite the contradictions in Trump's actual policies. Trump's rhetoric is rooted in the cult of tradition, promising a return to a mythic past of American greatness. His approach is deeply pragmatic. Trump uses tools that achieve this nostalgic vision, even when those tools contradict the very principles of traditionalism. Take his embrace of technology. Trump, supported by figures like Musk, promoted deregulating AI to ensure American dominance in innovation. Trump leverages technology to reinforce his vision of a greater America, but this reliance on progress directly clashes with traditionalist ideals, which often view modernity as corrupting and dangerous. Musk also echoes this pragmatism very much, already getting into conflict with the voter base over H-1B visas. The ideology was to make America great again, not bring in more immigrants to take away American jobs. Closely tied to tradition is the rejection of modernism. Fascism views progress as a corrupting force. Trump's rhetoric often mirrors this, blaming globalization, progressive cultural shift, and liberal policies for America's perceived decline. Consider his attacks on global trade deals, the Paris Agreement, or his resistance to progressive movements like Black Lives Matter. However, there is a contradiction here. While Trump rejects cultural modernism, he embraces technological modernism, using social media, crypto, and economic innovation as political tools. Nazi Germany was very similar in sharing this contradiction. One of the most visible principles in Trump's politics is fear of difference. Fascism thrives on identifying an other to unite against, and Trump has repeatedly used this tactic. From describing Mexican immigrants as rapists to instituting the Muslim travel ban, his rhetoric and policies often demonize outsiders. The Build the Wall chant at his rallies became a symbol of this fear, reinforcing the idea that America's problems are the fault of those who don't belong. Make no mistake, Trump would be right in trying to sort out a level-headed immigration policy. But the solution is complex and not black and white. The problem is not his leaning in being anti-immigration per se, but making it a black and white issue. Trump also embodies Eco's principle of appealing to a frustrated middle class. His campaign spoke directly to working and middle-class Americans who felt abandoned by globalization and betrayed by the political elite. With the Rust Belt, his promises to bring back manufacturing jobs resonated deeply. Even his tax cuts, though benefiting the wealthy disproportionately, were framed as relief for the average American worker. And on to the next principle. Trump's alignment with the principle of obsession with a plot is hard to ignore. Fascism often thrives on grand conspiracies, where the nation's problems are blamed on a shadowy enemy. For Trump, this has taken the form of constant references to the deep state, the election fraud, and even the QAnon adjacent rhetoric. During his first presidency, Trump frequently claimed he was the target of a vast conspiracy to undermine his leadership, The 2020 election in particular became a rallying cry with baseless claims of widespread fraud fueling distrust in democratic institutions. These conspiracies not only solidified loyalty among his base, but also justified extraordinary measures to challenge opposition. Another principle where Trump's politics aligned with fascism is the idea that the enemy is both strong and weak. This paradoxical framing creates fear and contempt, portraying opponents as simultaneously omnipotent threats and laughably incompetent. Consider how Trump talks about China. On one hand, it's painted as a powerful force stealing American jobs and undermining global trade. On the other, Trump claims his tariffs and trade policies are enough to keep China in check. Similarly, the media is described as a dominant force spreading fake news, but also mocked as corrupt and failing. And finally, where I see Trump's politics strongly aligned with fascism is with the principle of selective populism. This principle suggests that the leader claims to represent the true people, dismissing pluralism and opposition as un-American or illegitimate. For Trump, this has been a defining feature of his movement. Trump's rallies often feature rhetoric like "we are the real Americans," portraying critics as out-of-touch elites. His consistent dismissal of mainstream media as the enemy of the people reinforces this idea of a singular, authentic populist standing against corrupt institutions. And on a side note, an interesting principle where I also see Trump's politics and rhetoric aligning with Eco's concept, which is Machismo. Fascism often glorifies traditional gender roles and celebrates a strong, dominant version of masculinity. Trump frequently promotes an image of strength, whether it's bragging about his health, belittling opponents with nicknames, or emphasizing physical and mental toughness. This extends to his portrayal of family values, where traditional patriarchal family structures are celebrated. For many, his tough guy persona symbolizes the return of an idealized, traditional man who protects and leads his family. His supporters often see him as a protector of these values against the perceived threats of progressive gender politics. From fear of difference to selective populism and now machismo, these principles show how Trump's politics align with several core traits of fascism. Together, they paint a picture of a movement steeped in nostalgia, identity, and power. One of the most striking differences between Trump's politics and traditional fascism is his approach to war and diplomacy. Eco describes fascism as inherently anti-pacifist, glorifying war as a way to achieve national renewal. Yet Trump, despite his America First rhetoric, avoided starting new wars and even pursued diplomacy with adversaries like North Korea. Trump's historic meeting with Kim Jong-un was framed as a bold step toward peace, contrasting with the militaristic aggression typical of fascist regimes. While his administration did escalate tensions with countries like Iran, it led the all-out glorification of military conquest seen in historical fascism. And to see the difference even better, fascist regimes often mobilize entire societies into perpetual struggle, glorifying sacrifice and heroism for the state. In Trump's movement, however, there's little emphasis on collective struggle or sacrifice. Instead, his politics focus on individualism and personal success. Adding to the differences what we already mentioned, Eco's fascism rejected modernity as a corrupting force, while his rhetoric critiques cultural progressivism. His policies often champion innovation. Overall, perhaps the most significant divergence is the lack of cohesive ideology in Trump's movement. Fascism is often driven by a unifying, all-encompassing vision. Trump's politics, by contrast, are fragmented and transactional, appealing to different groups with inconsistent messages. He promises deregulation for corporations while championing the working class. He invokes traditional family values while his personal life contradicts them. This patchwork approach creates a movement that's populist and pragmatic, but far from ideologically uniform. This is where we need to stop and realize that the term fascism carries enormous historical weight, evoking images of Mussolini's Italy, Hitler's Germany, and Franco's Spain. But what helps understanding is Kevin Passmore's argument that fascism cannot be separated from its historical and cultural context. In Europe's interwar period, fascism thrived in nations devastated by war and economic ruin. It sought to replace liberal democracy with a one-party state, militarized society, and create a totalitarian vision of unity. By contrast, Trump's America operates within a functioning, albeit flawed, democratic system. And this is where it gets crucial. Labeling Trump as a fascist risks oversimplifying his movement and ignoring the broader dynamics of modern populism, and also loses the target on how to tackle his rhetoric. As you see, Passmore's work helps us understand that while fascism has a certain rhetoric of populism, not all populist rhetoric is fascist. Trump's politics are grounded in populism, a strategy that pits the people against the elite. But unlike fascism, his movement lacks the ideological coherence and totalitarian ambition to unify all aspects of society under one vision. Calling Trump a fascist is not just inaccurate, it can also be counterproductive. The label simplifies a complex phenomenon, making it harder to address the real issues at play. It suggests that removing Trump or his successors would solve the problem, ignoring the deeper structural and cultural forces driving his movement. Consider the rise of right-wing populism across the globe, from Bolsonaro in Brazil to Modi in India and Le Pen in France. These movements share traits with Trumpism, yet they operate in vastly different contexts. What they have in common is not fascism, but a global shift toward nationalism, populism, and authoritarian tendencies within democratic frameworks. As I pointed out, the real power of Trump's rhetoric lies in its incoherence. This incoherence allows his message to resonate with groups that would otherwise have nothing in common. Let's take two examples: Christians and neo-Nazis. For Christians, his appeals to traditional family values, opposition to abortion, and promises to protect religious freedom are central. Meanwhile, neo-Nazis latch onto his anti-immigration policies, nationalist rhetoric, and perceived tolerance of white identity politics. Both groups hear what they want to hear, focusing on the parts of his message that align with their own agendas. The problem arises when analysts or opposition politicians extrapolate from this dynamic. They see that Trump's rhetoric appeals to neo-Nazis and conclude that he must therefore be a fascist. But this is a fallacy. Just because a neo-Nazi supports Trump doesn't mean Trump embodies neo-Nazi ideology or fascism as a whole. Consider this. Trump's rhetoric also appeals to evangelical Christians and economically disadvantaged workers in the Rust Belt. Does this make him a theocrat or a socialist? Of course not. The same principle applies here. Appealing to neo-Nazis is not enough to categorize his entire movement as fascist. So is Donald Trump a fascist? The answer, as we explored, is not straightforward, but is most likely no. His rhetoric and politics echo several principles of fascism, but these similarities only tell part of the story. When we look closer, significant differences emerge. Trump's movement lacks the ideological coherence, totalitarian ambition, and collective mobilization that defined classical fascism. Instead, what we see is a fragmented, populist phenomenon shaped by modern grievances and a highly individualized leadership style. Trumpism is not about building a fascist state. It's about exploiting the vulnerabilities of a democracy. By focusing on the wrong label, we fail to address the deeper structural and cultural forces that make movements like his possible. For example, there is an understandable bipartisan frustration that drives voters toward populist candidates. The erosion of trusted institutions and the power of modern media to amplify fragmented rhetoric all contribute to Trump's success. None of these are unique to him, nor are they solved by simply opposing his leadership. As we see, Trump's movement is not the end of fascism, nor is it a continuation of its past. It's something new, a hybrid of modern populism, fragmented identity politics, and nostalgia weaponized through the 21st century. To confront it, we need a new understanding of what it represents and how it thrives in today's political landscape. In order to do that, tune into the channel, and as always, I was your host Matt, and you were watching The Y Club.